This is BBC News. I'm Sean Lay. The headlines at 3. The most senior civil servant in the Home Office, Sir Philip Ruttenham, has resigned. He says he'll sue the government for constructive dismissal. He's been in a very public dispute with the Home Secretary, Priti Patel.
I have been the target of a vicious and orchestrated briefing campaign. It has been alleged that I have briefed the media against the Home Secretary. This, along with many other claims, is completely false.
The first case of coronavirus contracted in the UK has been confirmed in Surrey, and this afternoon 3 more positive tests have been announced, bringing the UK total of cases to 23. In France, the government has announced a ban on all events involving more than 5,000 people, as it announces 16 new cases there. More than 80 flood warnings in place across England and Wales, as many already struggling communities brace themselves for the effects of Storm Jorge. And in half an hour's time here on BBC News, the newest mobile phone technology announced at a major conference via big screen, with most companies not travelling to it because of coronavirus. That's in Click at 3:30. Good afternoon. In the last hour, it's been revealed by the Department of Health that 3 more people in England have tested positive for coronavirus. They'd all recently returned from abroad, 2 from Italy, 1 from Asia. It brings the total number of cases in the UK so far to 23. Meanwhile, public health officials are trying to establish how one of those, a man from Surrey, became the first and so far only known person to contract coronavirus within the UK.
Affected others.
Any responsible government, and this is a responsible government that plans for all eventualities, to do exactly that, to consider all eventualities and have contingency planning for them. But we are very, very clear at the moment. We are entirely focused on making containment work as it has done, and that is the clinical advice we're taking from the Chief Medical Officer and his team.
Abroad in Tenerife, at the coronavirus hit hotel, more tourists have been able to leave. After days of being stuck, British guests got this letter from the Foreign Office. It says plans have been made to test them for the virus. If the result is negative and they can reassure their carrier, they should be able to fly home. In South Korea, they've brought in the army to disinfect areas. It's got the highest number of cases outside China, with nearly 3,000 people having been infected. The World Health Organization has upgraded the global risk of the outbreak to its highest level, and as more cases are confirmed, there's uncertainty about the future scale of this outbreak. And as more cases are confirmed, there's uncertainty about the future scale of this outbreak. Helena Wilkinson, BBC News.
And Helena is back in the studio with me. Helena, what more do we know about these 3 additional cases, which were only announced within the last hour?
Yes, so these cases have been confirmed to us. So we now know that there are 3 new cases of coronavirus in England. I think what's important to stress with these cases is that all of these people had recently travelled from abroad. So we've had confirmation from the Chief Medical Officer, Professor Chris Whitty, and he has said 10,483 people have been tested in the UK to see if they have the coronavirus. These 3 new cases that we've learnt of, as you say, in the last half hour or so, bring the total number of people in the UK to 23 who have now contracted the virus. And of course, as we heard there, that man in Surrey who felt unwell, went to see a GP and was confirmed as who felt unwell, went to see a GP and was confirmed as having the coronavirus. Well, the difference with him is that he didn't travel abroad recently, so the problem is they've got to find who it was within the UK who infected him and whether this person has also infected anyone else. So I think they're very frantically trying to work out how this man in particular has been infected.
So on the one side, they're having to do the detective work. On the other side, they're having to do the medical work, because we're presumably seeing what we've seen in Brighton and elsewhere, where because he went to the GP, they have to then shut the surgery and absolutely kind of clean every surface they can see to ensure that there's no danger of, however low level the risk might be, of the virus hanging around to infect anyone else.
Yes, and it was very swift. We saw last night at this medical centre in Surrey, where this man had gone to, that they closed that health centre very quickly. They did what's called a deep clean of the area, as you say, and it has now reopened. We've seen it very quickly. They did what's called a deep clean of the area, as you say, and it has now reopened. We've seen patients going in this morning, but of course the crucial thing that they are trying to do now is trying to contact trace, trying to find out exactly who has been in contact with this man who's been confirmed as having the coronavirus. He is from Surrey, and that, I think, was the worry. But for officials, health officials, that this is the first person to have contracted the coronavirus within the UK. There is a difference with this man compared to all the other cases we've seen.
Hello, Wilkinson. Thank you very much. Well, let's speak. European governments are taking action to try to contain the epidemic. In Italy, schools and universities will stay closed for a second consecutive week. The French government announced this lunchtime that it's ordered the cancellation of any gatherings of more than 5,000 people, which means that tomorrow's Paris Half Marathon is off. Let's talk now to our guest in Norwich. That's Professor George Lomonosov, who's a virologist at the is off. Let's talk now to our guest in Norwich. That's Professor George Lomonosov, who's a virologist at the John Innes Centre Research Institute, and he joins me now. Professor, good afternoon. I hope I've got your name right.
Yes, that was very good pronunciation. Thanks.
Good guesswork. Thank you. What do you make of the progression we're seeing? We could talk around the world, but let's talk specifically in the UK. Is it following the path that would have been predicted?
Yes, I think it is. Once we had outbreaks in Europe, and it wasn't confined to China or Southeast Asia, this was always likely to happen. And of course, the big change this time is the unfortunate gentleman who appears to have caught coronavirus, or has caught coronavirus, without actually travelling. And there may be, the authorities may be able to trace particular contacts, friends who had travelled, but it's also possible that it just picked it up through, say, travelling on a bus or train or some such, in which case it's going to be very difficult to track it back. I mean, I don't know the personal situation. Through, say, travelling on a bus or train or some such, in which case it's going to be very difficult to track it back. I mean, I don't know the personal situation, of course, in that instance.
And you know, because of patient confidentiality, it's unlikely we'll learn anything unless
absolutely.
he or his relatives choose to say anything publicly. But hopefully he's obviously receiving treatment, and hopefully he's recovering. I mean, it highlights two things, I suppose, doesn't it? Number one is an issue that's been mentioned before. People often go to the GP, don't know what's wrong with them. This is one of those situations where we're being encouraged to kind of call in rather than go in. I mean, it's a difficult call, isn't it, for patients, particularly, let's say, that somebody's got an elderly relative, somebody's got a young relative who worries about, they seem to be a bit less well than you'd expect with the flu we're used to having, whether or not to actually kind of go and see a GP.
Yes, and that is an issue. I mean, obviously, in terms of preventing spread, ideally it would be nice to do it, or optimal to do it remotely by calling 111. But the trouble is, if you're unsure what is causing the condition, optimal to do it remotely by calling 111. But the trouble is, if you're unsure what is causing the condition, diagnosis can actually be quite difficult just at a distance like that. And presumably the kind of advice you might get is to self-isolate. But you may need more treatment than that. So it's a very difficult call to make, especially if you may not even think it has anything to do with the outbreak.
Just in terms of the testing that's now taking place.
The kind of containment conditions and self-isolation, even if it does spread widely, I mean, can slow the progression of spread anyway. It's the kind of thing we're used to doing during the flu season, the seasonal flu season. But I mean, it can be difficult. I mean, I know with flu, I mean, I don't think people even attempt to track individual contacts in that case. The big problem is it's a respiratory illness, and it's in water droplets in the air. You don't have to have actual, touching kind of contact, which you would probably be able to, remember or, be aware of. So it could be that it's never traced, and remember or be aware of. So it could be that it's never traced, but it doesn't mean no effort should be made to try and stop the onward transmission.
Which, and I guess, is from what you were saying about water-droplets, is the reason why we're getting this advice, the sort of advice we used to get when we were kids, but suddenly it's become much more significant again about, sneeze into a tissue. If you can't sneeze into a tissue, sneeze into the crook of your hand. Reduce the risk of those water droplets getting out into the air and actually infecting someone else.
Yeah, it's very much the kind of thing we were told, or I was told, when I was a child, of coughs and sneezes spread diseases. And I think that's very true to this day. And I think most people, just as normal etiquette, would actually do that as a matter of course. But, just, in a way, a lot of it's very sensible precautions of just, hygiene, washing your hands, and not sneezing over people, or coughing without any kind of your hand if you haven't got anything, or a tissue. As that kind of thing can actually interrupt or reduce the rate of spread. Of course, it's not an infallible method, that alone.
Finally, I just wonder what your view is of the decision the French have announced only in the last couple of hours to ban large gatherings of people, 5,000 or more. I mean, is that the sort of thing that we're going to have to now consider?
I think we will have to consider it. It was interesting. I mean, it's some demonstration of the speed of this story. The actual information changed on my walk from home to the studio here. It was an update as it had occurred. So things are just changing all the time. I imagine that is under active consideration. And I saw this morning that the government is looking at having powers to enforce certain immediate powers to, say, close places or stop gatherings of people without having to go through a long legal procedure.
George Lomonosov, Professor and Virologist at the John Innes Centre in Norwich. Thank you very much for being with us this afternoon. Let me just mention that you may be interested by a programme on BBC One on Monday evening, Coronavirus, Everything You Need to Know. That's 7:30 this Monday on BBC One. And as the Professor was helpfully saying there, I like to think he's got BBC News app on his phone. If you haven't, it's probably a good time to think about downloading it, because those updates will appear as soon as we get them. As soon as we verify them, they're out there. And they will at least keep you in touch with what is being said officially, what the latest word is, and on those issues about both numbers and where cases are, and any additional and updated advice that comes from the Chief Medical Officer, Professor Chris Whitty. Now, the US and the Taliban have signed an historic deal which could see all US troops withdraw from Afghanistan within the next 14 months, provided the militants uphold their commitments. As you can see from the flashing photography, the deal was signed in the Qatari capital Doha by the US Special Envoy Zalmay Khalilzad and by the Taliban's political chief.
Thanks to last year's really strong winter, most water reservoirs are above normal levels. The next snow survey will take place on April 1st.
We're going to see community transmission in the United States.
A Solano County woman remains in the hospital this morning in serious condition. Now health officials are working to learn how she contracted the coronavirus, and they're tracking down anyone she came into contact with. Plus,
fear has kept them at home. It's kept them away from businesses. It's kept them away from shopping.
The stunning impact of the coronavirus not only has health officials worldwide wringing their hands, but economics and finance professors are scrambling too after Wall Street suffered a record free fall.
From KTVU Fox 2 News, this is Mornings on 2.
Good morning. Thank you for joining us here on Mornings on 2. It's Friday, February 28th. We get one more day in February 28th. We get one more day in February, though.
Do we?
This year, leaping tomorrow. Good morning. I'm Pam Cook.
And good morning. I'm Dave Clark. You threw me for a second. I forgot about that.
It's that leap year.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, we do have some clouds, but don't jump up and down.
Don't leap into it, yes.
Yeah, right.
High clouds, that's it.
High clouds.
Yes, our dry stretch is now up to 31 days. It'll probably go longer because really after this weekend, there's nothing till maybe around March 9th. And I'm telling you, as the old weatherman once said, all signs fail in dry weather. And boy, I just don't trust anything going forward. Now, high clouds, though, will keep us on the mild side. Boy, look at that. 50s on the temps here. Mix of some sun and high clouds today, and temperatures still well above seasonal averages, maybe down a teeny bit from yesterday. All right, Sal's here. So far, Friday light or something new?
It is Friday light, Steve, and we're not, on Fridays, lots of times we do have lighter volume as either people